So, doing something slightly different on the channel today, I'm going to rank boxing promotions using this handy tier list that I've created. Now, firstly, I'm not ranking them based on legacy, I'm ranking them based on how good they are right now in 2025. I'm going to rank them mainly based on their rosters and the quality of events. So to kick things off, we have the legendary Don King Promotions. Don King's story in boxing began when he was involved in helping a local hospital that was in desperate need of some cash. He enlisted the help of successful musician Lloyd Prince, who just happened to be friends with the late great Muhammad Ali, and he proposed a charity fight to raise funds. Ali agreed to the idea, and this was the very first time Don King had ever promoted a fight. The event was so successful that King managed to convince Ali to promote his future fights, and well, the rest is history. Now I'm just going to gloss over the fact that King is an awful human being who's responsible for multiple deaths, and just talk about how good King is as a promoter, because whatever you think of him, he's one of the greatest promoters to ever live, if not the greatest. When Don King is promoting a show, you know about it. He's got a larger-than-life personality, and he's put on some of the most iconic fights in the sport's history, from Rumble in the Jungle to Thriller in Manila, and promoted basically every iconic fighter in the sport, from Muhammad Ali to Foreman, Duran, Tyson, Holyfield, and many, many more. But in the present day, King is pretty much irrelevant in the sport and barely even passes as a promoter these days. I checked on his website to see what shows he's putting on, and the site is just filled with articles from last year and no mention of any upcoming events. So, yeah. Safe to say King is pretty much done in the sport, and at 93 years old, that's probably for the best. The last Don King show I watched was when King bizarrely won a purse bid for the WBA title fight between Daniel Dubois and Trevor Bryan. Watching the show was like being transported to the 1980s. The event took place in a casino with about 5 people in attendance, and the whole event was just bizarre to say the least. There's no denying the impact that Don King has had on the sport of boxing, and to be honest, he's only on this list because he is a legendary promoter, but based on what he's doing now, I can't put King any higher than D tier. Moving on to the newest promotion on the list, we have Ben Shalom's Boxxer. Boxxer began as Ultimate Boxer and ran 8-man elimination tournaments, similar to what Matchroom did with Prizefighter. Following the departure of Matchroom from Sky Sports, Sky were looking for a new promotion to work with, and Boxxer was chosen. In June of 2021, Boxxer signed a 4-year deal with Sky Sports. When Boxxer first started on Sky, I thought they had a solid run of shows early on, with Eubank Jr. vs Liam Williams, finally getting Kell Brook and Amir Khan to fight, which was a huge event, and also Josh Taylor vs Jack Catterall. However, I do think that momentum stagnated slightly with subsequent mediocre shows. One of the major focuses of Boxxer and Sky Sports in particular is women's boxing. Now for me personally, I'm not overly interested in the female side of the sport, so I tend to skip out on a lot of the fights on their shows. To give them credit, however, I think they do a fantastic job at promoting women's boxing. Their recent event with Natasha Jonas and Lauren Price in an all-female card in the Royal Albert Hall seemed like a very successful event. It just isn't for me, so a large portion of Boxxer's stable and fights just do not interest me personally. As for the upcoming events, well, they have Whittaker vs Cameron, the rematch, a co-promotion with Eddie Hearn for Eubank vs Ben, and not a whole lot more as of right now, which leads me nicely on to one of Boxxer's major weaknesses, which is their stable. Their roster of fighters is pretty shallow compared to other promotions on this list, and that means they're unable to pump out shows as regular as, for example, Matchroom or Top Rank. That's not to say they don't have talented fighters, they definitely do, with the likes of Adam Azim, who is by far their best fighter on their roster in my opinion, and someone who could achieve big things in the sport. They also have lots of Olympic talent, such as silver medalist Ben Whittaker, which not many are high on at the moment following his fight in Saudi against Liam Cameron, but nevertheless, he's still a very talented fighter, so they do have talent, but they lack depth. And they also lack star names, which is the most important thing of any promotion. The most high-profile fighter is probably Chris Eubank Jr. As for the whole production and everything, well, the commentary team and pundits for the most part are fine, other than Johnny Nelson, who is just the biggest company man on earth. I like him as a personality, but he has some moments here and there, like when he said James Tennyson could KO Tank Davis. They also have one of my favourite announcers in the sport in Big Mo, so there's that at least. As for Ben Shalom as a promoter, well, he's got all the charisma of a plank of wood and looks like a very shady character to say the least. So Boxxer is going into C tier. Next we have Golden Boy Promotions. The promotion was established by Hall of Fame fighter Oscar De La Hoya, the Golden Boy himself. His boxing career spanned from 1992 to 2008, capturing multiple world titles. In the latter years of his career, he founded Golden Boy Promotions in 2002, and would be the chairman and CEO. The promotion's first major event would be De La Hoya's fight with Floyd Mayweather in 2007, and they did another major event with Top Rank when he fought Manny Pacquiao, which was his final fight of his career. Oscar would then retire as a fighter to be a boxing promoter full time. I'm going to put Golden Boy in B tier. I think they're slacking behind other major promotions with some quite lackluster cards. They do have a solid show though on March the 29th, which is a rematch of William Zepeda vs Tevin Farmer. Their first fight back in November was highly entertaining. Zepeda went into the fight with plenty of hype, with many believing he could cause Shakur Stevenson problems, but he failed to impress against Farmer, and he's looking to right the wrongs of the first fight. Golden Boy does tend to have some good action-packed fights from the events that I've seen. They've also got a pretty decent roster with some top-level talent such as Gilberto Ramirez, Oscar Collazo, Arnold Barboza Jr., Virgil Ortiz Jr., and some female world champions too. And they've also signed some exciting prospects recently, in particular Joshua Edwards, who was a standout American amateur. And yeah, overall a solid roster of fighters, but their shows are lacking in quality and depth, so I'm going to put them in B tier. Up next we have Frank Warren's Queensberry Promotions. Boxing was in Frank's life from the beginning, with many of his family members boxing themselves, including his second cousin, Lenny McLean, who, for those outside of the UK, he's what John Fury pretends he is.
You interfere with my kids,
right? Right.
Take your head right off, smash everything from here, smash everything.
McLean had just lost a fight in which Frank was in attendance, and couldn't find a promoter to do the rematch. So Frank agreed to become an unlicensed promoter and managed to get McLean a trainer and made the rematch. Warren would soon become the leading figure in British boxing, promoting some of the biggest stars of the sport, such as Naseem Hamed, Joe Calzaghe, Amir Khan, Ricky Hatton, and many more. I think Queensberry has massively stepped up in recent years. At one point, it felt like Frank was falling way behind his main rival Eddie Hearn, especially during the Matchroom Sky era, where Matchroom consistently put on some of the biggest and best fights in the UK, and Frank didn't really have the most in-depth stable. However, now I'd actually say that Frank has definitely caught up to Eddie in the UK, and arguably has put on better shows over here, while Eddie has focused more on other markets. He had a great show on the weekend that just passed with Nick Ball defending his WBA featherweight world title against former champion TJ Doheny. He's got some solid shows coming up with the likes of Joyce vs Hrgovic, Kakache vs Lee Wood, which is one of my most anticipated fights of the year, and also the return of Josh Taylor taking on WBO European champion Echo Esserman. As for Frank's stable of fighters, well, it's absolutely stacked in one particular division, the most important division in boxing, the heavyweight division. Frank, unlike Eddie, clearly understands the power and importance of a strong heavyweight stable. The stronger your heavyweight roster is, the stronger your business will be, and Frank has done an unbelievable job at securing not only the present day of heavyweight boxing, but also the future. Right now, he has the current IBF world champion Daniel Dubois, who is still only 27 years old, and probably could fight on for another decade. He has, of course, the former WBC and Ring Magazine champion Tyson Fury, who I don't believe is retired. You've also got the likes of Joseph Parker, who is looking like he will be getting a shot at the world title anytime now. If that wasn't enough, Frank's also got another fighter who soon could be heading into a world title fight, and that's German heavyweight Ajit Kabayel, who has literally flown under the radar in the last few years and picked up some solid wins against the likes of Zhang and the supposed boogeyman of the division, Frank Sanchez. And if I'm still not selling it to you how brilliant Frank's heavyweight stable is, then let me introduce you to Moses Atalma, a 20-year-old generational talent who I've made an entire video on last year. So Frank is killing it in the glamour division of boxing, but he also has quality fighters in the lower weights too, with the likes of former featherweight champion Anthony Kakache, Nick Ball, Hamza Shiraz, who I know many thought he lost in Saudi recently, but still has a bright future in the sport. So yeah, overall a solid stable of fighters. Speaking on the man himself for a moment, what I like about Frank Warren is he's probably the most determined human being I've ever seen. This guy literally survived a gunshot from point blank range, which resulted in him losing half a lung and parts of his ribs, and he was unable to promote for over a year, which resulted in his business going into liquidation. Despite such a horrific ordeal, he managed to rebuild his entire career to become a major player in boxing again. Even in the darkest days of British boxing, when title fights were being held in leisure centres, Frank still persisted where many other promoters gave up. You can never write off Frank. So I'm going to put Queensberry in A tier. I don't think they belong any higher than that, as other promotions have much deeper stable of fighters. Also, the fact that Frank mainly focuses on a single market, the UK, holds him back slightly when compared to other promotions that are international. And speaking of international promotions, let's talk about Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing. Matchroom was formed in 1982 by Barry Hearn, father of course to Eddie Hearn, and originally focused on snooker management. Matchroom would enter the world of boxing with Frank Bruno vs Joe Bugner in 1987. In front of 35,000 people at the old White Hart Lane Stadium. Matchroom would eventually leave boxing, but would return thanks mainly to Barry's son, Eddie Hearn, who would eventually take over the boxing part of the business. Eddie got into the sport when he met Olympic gold medalist Audley Harrison at a poker game. Harrison asked Eddie if he was able to get him a fight, and Eddie would agree and rebuild Harrison's career, eventually getting him a world title shot. This was just the beginning of Eddie in boxing. Over the next few years, Eddie would revitalise the sport of boxing in the UK. Matchroom would soon become the leading promotion in the UK and would eventually become an international promotion, staging events all across the world thanks to a $1 billion deal with the sports broadcaster DAZN. Matchroom for me are the best promotion in the world as of right now. Not by a huge margin, but I'd say overall their quality of shows from the undercards to the main events have been consistently better than a lot of their competition. They've done some solid shows so far this year with Catterall Barboza, Lewis Crocker vs Paddy Donovan, and co-promoting the card of the century with Bivol vs Beterbiev too. They have a world-class stable of fighters such as Dimitri Bivol, Jai Opetaia, Shakur Stevenson, Jaron Ennis, Jesse Rodriguez, as well as some outstanding young talent like Diego Pacheco. As for Eddie, well, he's quite a unique promoter, and what I mean by that is most promoters aren't publicly accessible. You'd find it hard to get an interview with the likes of Bob Arum or Frank Warren unless you're like a serious media publication, but Eddie seems to have time for everyone. He was the first promoter in boxing that I can remember at least to understand the power of social media early on, which is probably down to his age. He's much younger than Frank and Bob, which gives him an advantage in terms of understanding the modern world. I haven't seen any other promoter engage with fans the way Eddie does on social media. I mean, even I've had a Twitter interaction with him at one point. Eddie has managed to build up a massive profile for himself, which in turn means his shows get better visibility. In the UK, Eddie is literally a celebrity. Even one of my friends who doesn't even follow the sport knows who Eddie Hearn is. And that's because he engages in so much media, from interviews and podcasts. He constantly crosses over to the mainstream, especially with his no context Hearn memes that went viral thanks to the countless interviews he's done with Kugan Cassius on IFL. He's the best promoter in the sport. I was going to say second because Dana is fully invested now in boxing, but you have to give him credit where it's due. Eddie has turned a family business into a global empire, and he's definitely the leading promoter in the sport for me. So Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing goes into S+ tier. Now let's talk about everyone's favourite cult, the PBC. Now, PBC is the second biggest American promotion in my opinion, and the promotion of the Shadow Man, Al Heyman, a almost mystical figure in boxing that some don't even believe even exists. That's because, unlike the rest of the promoters on this list, he never features in an interview, press conference, or anything that shows his face. He's all about the behind-the-scenes business and allowing his fighters to do the talking. Technically, he's not even a promoter, as he's seen as more of a manager/advisor, which under the Muhammad Ali Act prohibits managers from also serving as promoters. Heyman started to gain recognition with his time spent being the manager of Floyd Mayweather. With this connection to one of the biggest stars of the sport, he gained plenty of influence in boxing. In 2015, Heyman set up Premier Boxing Champions, originally starting out with the aim of returning boxing to mainstream broadcast and cable television instead of premium channels and pay-per-view models, as most major events were only being shown on pay-per-view. Their business strategy has changed quite a bit since then, as fans will tell you, and they've done many pay-per-views. Actually, they're pretty notorious for doing them. Their only events this year so far have both been pay-per-views. So yeah. Speaking of those pay-per-views, they put on David Benavidez vs David Morrell Jr., which was a good fight to be fair, and Tank Davis vs Lamont Roach, with their next event being Sebastian Fundora defending his welterweight belt against contender Chordale Booker, who I remember was stopped in a round a few years ago against Austin Ammo Williams. He's not a bad fighter by any means, he could offer a decent test to Fundora, but he has zero name value. Their next show after that is probably worse, with the headliner being former WBO champion Tim Tszyu taking on American Joey Spencer, which is a fight I'm not overly interested in if I'm being honest. They do have a solid stable of fighters with great talents like David Benavidez, Lamont Roach Jr., Joe Valenzuela, Sebastian Fundora like I just mentioned, and more. A problem with the PBC though is they do have issues with inactivity, with lots of their star fighters not getting out enough, and also matching them up with poor opposition. I actually think the PBC are one of the worst for matchmaking. I think they just get above B and they go into A tier. Now onto the final promotion on the list, we have Bob Arum's Top Rank Promotions. Before becoming a Hall of Fame promoter, Bob Arum had a very successful legal career, working as an attorney in the United States Department of Justice during the John F. Kennedy administration. In 1962, Bob would have his first encounter with the sport of boxing when he was assigned by the Department of Justice to confiscate proceeds from the Sonny Liston vs. Floyd Patterson World Heavyweight title fight. Arum would eventually leave his government work behind and enter the world of boxing full-time, and would soon promote his first world title fight, which was Muhammad Ali vs George Chuvalo in 1966. Bob would go on to promote some of the most iconic fighters in the sport, such as Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and the list goes on. And fast forward to 2025, the 93-year-old Bob is still crushing it and leading one of the biggest promotions in the world. Coming up soon, they've got Janibek defending his IBF and WBO middleweight titles against French fighter Anyol Nagamasengi. I don't think I pronounced that correctly. I can't see another French upset here. It's a pretty poor matchup in my opinion, and I see Janibek winning comfortably. They've also got America's next big hope at heavyweight, Olympic silver medalist Richard Torres Jr. I'm not massively high on Torres Jr. to be honest. He's definitely got a fan-friendly style, and he's a welcome addition to the heavyweight division, but I can't see him doing much at the top level. He's still only 25 though, so there's still plenty of potential with him. Anyway, he's taken on Italian heavyweight Guido Vianello, who is coming off a win against Arslanbek Makhmudov, which I think is a good opponent for Torres in his 13th fight of his professional career. Then we have the monster Inoue, who is back in action on May the 4th, making his eagerly anticipated return to the US, which sucks for me because in the UK his fights were on at like 11 AM, which was just awesome. So it's going to be a sleepless night for me, but he'll be taking on Mexican-American Ramon Cardenas. So yeah, some decent shows to look forward to in regards to Top Rank, and overall I'd say they're one of the most consistent promotions with the level of quality on their cards. Their roster is, in my opinion, the best in boxing right now. They have what I see as the second pound-for-pound best fighter on the planet right now in Inoue, recently crowned WBO World Champion Keyshawn Davis, as well as the likes of Teofimo Lopez, Beterbiev, Oshaki Foster, and many more. So I'm going to put Top Rank just below Matchroom in S tier, as the second best promotion right now. I should really be putting them in D tier for the amount of times my videos have been struck by copyright, but it is what it is. Bob Arum, whether you hate him or love him, is probably the best promoter of all time. At 93 years of age, he's the longest serving promoter, having worked in the sport across 7 decades. He's a living legend, and he's still a major player in the sport. So let me know in the comments below who you think is the best promotion right now. Maybe we'll have to do an updated list when Dana White takes over the sport. Thanks for watching.